so here I'll just read through this briefly. So this document, and it has a companion workbook, describes a typical workflow for producing plasma profiles and transport analysis with the intention of a kinetically constrained equilibrium reconstruction. So that means we want to make an equilibrium reconstruction with the pressure and current from the fast particles and bootstrap current model. So the high-level goal is to produce an EFIT that has the source functions P prime and FF prime in the Grierson equation constrained by additional information provided by the experimental thermal and model-based fast ion pressure and current constrained by a bootstrap current model. We use Sauter here. So there's a bunch of steps in this workflow, and so they're described here. There's 8 major steps. Of course, you have to select the shot for the discharge and the time base for the analysis that you want to do. I just edited that. So then you need to select the configuration file to produce an equilibrium. We call it a snap file. And that creates a file called a K file. And that includes the basic constraints and switches for the desired final equilibrium reconstruction. Then you have to go through the task of performing profile analysis on an existing equilibrium to A, constrain a refined equilibrium based on some edge profile measurements, and B, form the inputs required for the transport code of choice, and we'll use transp here. Then the next step is to produce a refined equilibrium that satisfies the step 3A. And then you're going to refit the profiles on that refined equilibrium in preparation for transp. So steps 3 to 5 can be iterated as necessary. Usually you don't have to, but they can be a principle. Then you're going to run your transport code, and it's going to evolve the foil field diffusion equation. And that'll give you the OMEG and bootstrap and a realistic current profile. Then you're going to produce a kinetically constrained EFIT. And then the last option is to rerun that transport code using an input equilibrium without evolving the current or without evolving the foil field. And this last step can be skipped if the product at the end of this is what you really want is an EFIT for like stability, edge stability analysis or something. But if the final result is a self-consistent equilibrium and transport analysis for something like transport model validation, then the final step is generally necessary. All right, so that's kind of a long-winded overview of what we're going to do. I'm not going to go through all the details of this. It's easier to learn by just watching. All right, so I'm going to go back to my screen that I was sharing. And I'm going to go over here to a computer. It's called Iris. This is the computer we have at DIII-D. And what I'm going to do, I can just do a clean login, go to Iris.
And you saw that
we have the users module.
The time traces were done through
the Atom module, which is an advanced tokamak modeling module that has OMFIT as one of its components. And then I'm just going to run OMFIT by typing OMFIT. I'm actually running my version of it, but most people just type OMFIT. All right, it's going to print off, what modules are available on the machine that you're running on. Hold on, I need to move the screen here. I'm just going to resize this window. Okay, so it says what's new, right? This is the splash screen. One modeling framework for integrated tests. And it says, what's happened recently. So recently I added something that allows you to calculate nickel and tungsten densities from radiative power. It's something that we need because we're running a metals campaign right now in DIII-D. And if you click on that little question mark, it'll show the code. And what was added. Here's some atomic rates from post-1977, some old stuff. And I added the code to evaluate these polynomials. Okay. So now this is the graphical interface, and it has a couple of views here, and this is similar to what Orso always describes this as, like the file system on your computer. It shows all the data and information and modules that are loaded into memory. Here's a console and a command box where I can print. You can print something. And A equals one space 0 to 1 to 100. Print A. Right? You can plot things too. But this is only useful for if you're developing and it says to search for the module that you want. Now I'm going to do this one that's called kineticEFITtime, which is a multi-time kinetic equilibrium reconstruction. And it has submodules in it. So I'm going to load this. And it tells you here what it's doing. It loaded a bunch of scripts. Then over here in the command box, you can use the left and right arrow keys to drill down on these modules. And so kineticEFITtime is a super module with submodules. It has EFITtime, which runs many equilibrium reconstructions. It has a tool called OMFIT-Profiles, and OMFIT-Profiles is the profile analysis suite of scripts that we've developed. And trans is a module, but also inside of trans is something called TRXPL that allows you to extract a transplasma state for doing things like running a gyrokinetic code like gyro. So I'm going to start this workflow by just hitting enter. And it's of course very tokamak centric. And we try to make it so that you can run this on any device. So right now we can run this on D3D, NSTX, Compass, CMOD, and any other machine that wants to add the little scripts that fetch the data can be added. So for this case, I'm going to run, this shot number is 163303, and I'm going to run from 2900 to 5300 in 100 millisecond steps. So this is going to be a very coarse but long plasma profile analysis, essentially transport time scale analysis of how the plasma is evolving. And so this is one of those critical steps where you decide first the shot of interest, and then you decide really the time base for all the future analysis you're going to be doing. If you want to do really high-speed stuff and look at something across an helm crash, then of course you want to do things on like a millisecond. But if you want to do long time current realization time or energy confinement time analysis, you can do something more like 20. But for this workflow, I'm just going to do 100 just to make it fast. So I hit enter, and these little text boxes evaluate any Python expression. All right, so I'm going to load a snap file that tells me how to make my EFIT. And I'm going to choose it from a list of options here. I'm going to choose it from our MDS Plus database. And I'm going to use EFIT02, which in D3D speak, EFIT02 means a magnetics plus internal MSD constrained equilibrium reconstruction. It does not have any pressure information. It doesn't really have a pressure pedestal or anything like that. So now I need to do something which is called generate these K files from this send file. Someone's sending me a message.
Okay.
Yes, this is the shot that I spoke about previously when I was showing the time traces from that scope module. It says D3D reference shot. Okay. So now it had to go get all kinds of data. It had to get the magnetic data and it has to get the magnetic data, it has to get the MSD data, and a number of other things. So I see that Orso would like me to show you that whenever you fetch data, you get data, it'll go into the tree structure over here. So what I just did is I got some information from EFIT, and that went into the EFITtime module. So that created these inputs. And the inputs are a snap file, which is a text file, and I can view it easily by just hitting spacebar. And you see here it's a portrait nameless. So this file was grabbed from MDS Plus, and then it was used to create all of these different files, which are called K files. And K files are drivers for EFIT. They are all nameless as well. And you see they have all this stuff of information. Now, commonly, when people write graphical interfaces in IDL or some other tool, MATLAB, what have you, sometimes it can be very difficult to access the information stored in some small hidden location deep down in some file. Right? You've loaded a bunch of stuff into memory, but you're locked into this graphical interface that doesn't allow you to maybe access that. And that forces you to make buttons for like everything that you could imagine. But we're not doing that. What we have is this browser structure where, for some time, if I want to go in and if I want to change one of these switches, I can just hit tab, and I can change this number to something else, right? Like in trans, there's like a million switches, and one can easily add a switch or change a switch to something that you like. And so the user has the powerful capability to go in, if you're a pro user and you like editing name lists from the command line, you have access to all of that information right here in the tree browser. So that means it doesn't remove any capabilities. Right? That's one of the things that I personally used to not like about making graphically driven tools is that if you make them in something like IDL, that it can be hard to change something that's like a small tweak, right? You want to remove a data point from a profile. Well, that can be really terrible to try to do. You need to make a button and a workflow and a driver that enable you to do that. But this allows you to cut out a data point if you want. All right, so now it's moved on to the next step. And one of the things that you saw is that the graphical interface reforms to only present you with the information you need to make the next step. Just like your iPhone is like a context-sensitive menu, the keyboard's only there when you need to type. This one, it only gives you the options and the checkboxes that you need when it's time to perform a specific task. So the graphical interface refreshes constantly. So what I'm going to do is, this is what's called iteration 0, and I want to do my profile analysis. So there's the main tab, which is the driver tab, and then there's the profile tab. And it's going to do a couple of steps, which is what we call fetch, which at the front end, it gets all the data you're going to need. All the data you're going to need for your profile analysis for the whole shot. We're not doing profiles time slice by time slice piecewise. What we want to do is we want to provide the user with all the data in a powerful and comprehensive set of visualizations that allow you to select if maybe a bolometer channel is bad and it looks crazy. We want to be able to easily see that. We want to use one tool for visualizing the raw data as well as all the profiles. So there's a couple of steps here. It's called fetch, and this gets all the data. And so there's a couple of options here, and I'll just show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use an equilibrium that's required for mapping the profiles from physical space and the diagnostic coordinates to the flux surface space. Now each machine has their own settings. So now we're in OM's profiles tool. Under scripts, under DIII-D, there is fetch. And so for DIII-D, there's scripts for fetching all these different diagnostics. Constant scattering, charge exchange, equilibrium, CO2 interferometer, electron cyclotron emission, bolometer, the gas fueling, soft X-ray, spread poor resolution spectrometer, visible Bremsstrahlung, and specifics about Elm detection. Now another machine like NSTX also has fetch scripts. So whenever you do fetch here, you're fetching all the data for your token. So in that sense, it's machine independent. So for DIII-D, here's just a couple of options. There's a couple of flavors of charge exchange analysis, and we're just going to take whichever is the best one available. And I'm also going to fetch the visible Bremsstrahlung. It's an optional diagnostic. I'll fetch it just because I want to show you something about it. Now, most data points have elms. So elms are very rapid events that typically cause data corruption and cause an issue with fitting the data when you want to do the data analysis based on the elms. So you want to eliminate time slices in the data that have large elms that cause a lot of scatter. And so this is one of the first graphics I'm going to show you, which is the plotting of the elm finder that we have. And you can see I'm gonna zoom in here. And here's an elm that is detected by a filter scope, called a filter scope. And then in the bottom is the window at which the elm exists, and then like the duration, the inter-elm duration. You see this box down here is as wide as the period between the elms. And the smaller little region here is quote unquote during the elm. You can see we're using matplotlib for all the graphics. And you can see here, this is the time between elms. You can see it starts off with a low elm frequency, a long time between elms. And then as the power ramps up, the elm frequency goes down and down. Elm frequency goes up and up and up as the period goes down. And so this is just some basic history of the plasma evolution. There's also some details about how it got the elm, but I won't get into that. All right, so now what I've done is I said, well, I want to eliminate the data during the elm. And so I've done that. The default settings are totally reasonable. I think someone just joined.
Absolutely.
Let us know who joined. Okay. I don't have to get the audio set up, but I will ask him to mute once he's available. So if you guys can still hear me, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fetch all the data.
Ooh, la, la.
So this is going to be Elise, you're going to say something? Elise.
Yeah.
Can someone confirm that they can still hear me? All right, we're going to have, yes, you can still hear me? Thumbs up?
Thumbs up.
Okay. Hello? Someone just joined? You can't hear us yet. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fetch all the data. And there's a whole lot of data. But what OLMPIT does is it does this in parallel. So I'm going to say get all my diagnostic data. Right? This is charge exchange, Thompson scattering, electron cyclotron emission, all these different diagnostics. And it's going to load them all into the tree structure here. So over here you see that the outputs, inputs and outputs are empty. Once this thing is done fetching all the data, it's going to apply some timings. You're going to see it now here in outputs. So in outputs raw, there's Thompson scattering, there's a vertical and tangential charge exchange equilibrium, CO2 interferometer. And in each one of these is a system that is loaded based on our local jargon. So this is what we call a core R+1 Thompson scattering. And in each one of these subsystems, each one has a channel. And so you can see here there's a whole bunch of channels. Here's channel 10. And I can plot, just by hitting enter, the time history of Thompson scattering core system channel 10 electron density. So right away, you have, by just fetching the data and browsing here, you have easy access to all the data. And you can look at it in all types of different ways. But I'll get to that in a second. So I just have some notes here. I want to make sure I'm going through this correctly. Okay. So now I'm going to go to the step which is called slice. And slice needs a little bit of explanation. On DIII-D and most tokamaks, the data records from the time history of diagnostics are not continuous. They occur for various time periods, and they occur at different sampling rates. So for us, for Thompson scattering, there's a system near the magnetic axis, and it has a lower laser pulse rate than the system that's near the pedestal. And so there's two different time bases there. Also, for charge exchange, it depends on a neutral beam being on. So depending on which beam is on at which time, a diagnostic may report data or may not. There could be missing data, there's gaps, and all types of things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the time history of all of our diagnostics onto one time base. We're going to interpolate everything onto the time base that we chose before, which is the time base for our equilibrium reconstruction. This is the time base for the analysis as we want to perform. So for this example, I'm doing something very crude. I'm going to use a 50 millisecond time base to average the data, because I'm looking at long time evolution, kind of transport time evolution effects. And I'm going to, just for speed, I'm going to use the error bar reported is just the deviation of the error. And there are options to interpolate where data is missing, or you can use different weightings depending on if the analysis you're doing is very, very, very high speed, right? You want to take the data as close to its real speed as possible. You don't want to do any averaging. But if you're doing something on current realization or transport time scales, you want to get rid of the fast MHD events like the elm. Now, I'm going to accept the elm phase as between 0 and 1, which means that I'll just take all the data, but remove the data when there actually is an elm. Okay, and I'll show you how that cleans up the data in a second. So now I'm going to do what's called slicing. So this is going to put all the time histories of all the diagnostics onto a common time base. What this eliminates is the need for a user to change an averaging window as they go through the time history to maybe get data that is far away from the time range, or sub-select data that has a high sampling frequency that is going to really weight your fit because there's so much data for that given subsystem. Okay. Now it did that in parallel. It went through every single diagnostic, took all the time histories and put them on a common time history. So now the next selection is to look at the diagnostics that we have. So here we have electron cyclotron emission. We have tangentially viewing impurity CER. And what is presented is the diagnostic data, essentially with some amount of local jargon. So the system here is the systems that were defined in fetch. So if you have a Thompson scattering system that comes from port K12345, for your tokamak, that diagnostic would show up here with the jargon that you locally defined at your machine for fetching that data. So therefore, everything like kind of propagates. It's front-loaded such that when you fetch everything is very generally propagated through in time. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot the Thompson scattering data, and I'm going to look at this is called R+1. I'm going to plot the raw time series of all the data. And so here we use these figure notebooks to look at things like the electron density and electron temperature. And there's a lot of data here, so there you have it. This is the time history of every single channel for this diagnostic. And there's some vertical dashed bars here that show the beginning and the end of my analysis time. And it's color-coded based on like channel number. So I have some notes here that I'm going to look at channel R+1 number 2. And I'm going to zoom in here on this channel. What you're going to see here is that this is the time history of a diagnostic, and it's all in purple. Most of these outliers here are red, because these outliers were caught by our Elm selection. It removed a lot of these big data points that are outside of our time, that are during an Elm, that would be causing a problem with the profile fit later in time. What you also see here in this purple band is the time smooth selected data that we will be fitting in the next set of steps. So this is the data that has a Hanning convolution time evolution, and you'll see that there's these sharp transitions every 100 milliseconds, because what is here in purple is the representation of the data on the time base that we have selected. Okay, so now I'm also going to look at another channel, which is R+1, maybe number 30, something like this. These are all cores that are near the magnetic axis, and they all have a fairly smooth time evolution. And here you can go in and look at any one particular thing in time. Right? You can see the representation of the data that we will be doing. And the similar thing is set up here for the electron temperature and the electron pressure. You can see how the different channels are affected by Helm. All right. Now, I'm going to plot what is called the splice data next. So these are all the different channels. I can plot any of the time histories. I can also plot what's called the splice data. So this is going to plot the electron density, electron temperature, and electron density for our shots at all the different times that we're selecting for our analysis. So here's the electron temperature from Thompson scattering from earlier to later in the shot, so there's this power step later. Here's the electron density profile from this, and this is essentially the raw data. The colored bands are just connecting the error bars. And any disabled channels, for example, we disabled the diverter because we don't usually use it for fitting core profiles, those are all here in gray. This allows you to just have a very high level look at all the data. And we want to make sure that the user has a chance to see how things evolve in time, which channels are systematically high or low. They can go and talk to the respective diagnostician and get advice about how to handle it. And then there's all the different diagnostics here. So there's ECE, tangential CER, constant scattering, the bolometer for radiative power, our vertical CER system, visible rupture lung, and our CO2 interferometer. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to deselect a couple of things here just for demonstration purposes. And I know some of these bolometer channels, one or two of them are bad. Upper 22, I was told it should not be used. And bolometer, lower number 20. But I know that those are bad for this shot. Okay. Now, one of the things that we do that a lot of people consider an integrated data analysis procedure is that we have generally conflicting information. We have conflicting information in that we have a constant scattering system that measures the electron density profile, and we have a CO2 interferometer system that has a number of different sight lines, and they measure a line average density. And one of the things you want to do is you want to come up with the best self-consistent representation of what we believe the electron density is, taking into account all the information that we have. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot here just the raw time history of our CO2 interferometer, which you can see here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 different channels. And this is line average density. And then I'm going to plot something that's called the CO2 normalization. So we use a normalization here to adjust the absolute calibration of our Thomson scattering system based on the different lens locations to make the electron density profile as self-consistent as possible. I know other people do this with edge electron density. I think JET does this. They have a couple of different diagnostics that they piece together. Other machines do this. So here is the plot of, this is the sideline. So here's all the different Thomson channel locations. And then here is the normalization that is calculated to adjust some of our systems. So in the solid line here is the line average density integrated along a given sight line, and the error bars here are from the CO2 system. So we come up with a normalization here, which is the CO2 over the Thomson scattering normalization. You see it's pretty close to 1. And very small adjustments are required to make the CO2 interferometer consistent with Thomson scattering. If you want to see it in time, we call this stitching. So this is the stitching together of these two different diagnostics. And here you see it'll just play through in time what the Thomson scattering system is and what the normalized Thomson scattering is, and we will be fitting. And you can just view it. And this is the time history of the normalization. That's one of the things that requires multiple diagnostics in order to come up with a self-consistent view of what the plasma is doing. Okay, so now that we've selected our systems and our channels that we want to fit, I'm going to move on to now fitting all the data. And the fitting function I'm going to use is called radial basis function. There's a number of different fit methods that are allowed. You can just connect the points linearly. There's a biased form of this radial basis function, or there are things that are like user-defined. So under user-defined fitting functions, there's a whole list. So we call it scale-length fitting, Gaussian processes, nearest, bivariate spline, tension spline. There's a historical way of doing this in a tool called GA Profiles that uses knotted splines. You can use that. That's an IDL procedure, but OMFit handles it seamlessly. It's just one IDL processes. Modified TAN-H's, or a number of different things. So I'm going to go back to radial basis functions here. And since I've looked at this shot, I know that I need to have a little bit of smoothing for this profile. And I'm going to select it to 1.0, which is a reasonable smoothing. So now I have all this Thomson scattering data that I showed before, and I'm going to fit the density profile. I'm going to fit the density profile for all space and time. And I'm going to, so here I'm going to do it. So you just click fit. And it's incredibly fast. It took 1.7 seconds to fit, 100 time slices of Thomson scattering. And then what I can do is I can look at the quality of my fit. So what you have is an interactive profile plotting tool. So there's my Thompson scattering density profile. On top of it, in the smooth curve, is the fit to it. Clearly, this is an H mode. And I can use the arrow keys to move forward and back in time. So here I'm moving forward in time. There's some big low frequency elements, so you can see the density profile adjust. And then now I'm at the end of my time. Then I move back. And I can see that it does a reasonable job of fitting the data. Right? Nothing's too crazy. I can also select to hold one time slice static, and then I'll move forward in time, and I can see how the profile changed. You just do this with the arrow keys. Like you see here that the density gradient becomes steeper as the pedestal goes down. As it goes into a higher L frequency, and the density starts to drop. And here now I can very easily compare two different time slices. So a lot of times this is actually kind of difficult to do if you have a standalone tool that fits a single time slice. So it's very, very easy to compare your profiles throughout time. But also you can plot the 2D interactive density profile fit. So this is the time evolution of my electron density. The contour is density here. On the top is the time history at wherever I click. And on the right is the profile. And if I drag over some time period, I can see here how my pedestal density is dropping as the Elm frequency goes down. Here you can see the pedestal density dropping here to the right. You just click again to select any given time you want to look at. So right away up front, you see if there's like a really dramatic change in time history. You're going to see if one time slice has this big outlier. Right, of course, if I plot here near the top of the pedestal, there's a couple of jagged points, but there's some large elements there. But that's okay, that's really in the data. Now I'm going to go on and I'm just going to, just for sake of ease, I'm going to set that smoothing function for all my different profiles. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fit all the quantities. So all these different profiles will be fit, which is electron density, temperature, ion temperature, total velocity, carbon density, toroidal velocity, and radiant power. These are all the standard inputs to a transform. So I click go, and it's going to run through all the different fits. Some of these fitting functions are like tomographic inversion per bolometer. Well, that analysis is not done inside OMFit. It's actually a Fortran executable that lives on a different computer. And OMFit is really powerful in that it spawns remote processes, runs remote codes, and then pulls all the data back and places it into the tree here, where we can then quickly and easily visualize, manipulate, do anything we need to do. And so it's printing off here all the different things that it's doing. And you can see here what it is. It computes like ER. It runs through all the different ion species that it finds and creates the effective. It calculates a bunch of things that you can calculate from the NRL formulary, right? A lot of times you don't want to wait for a transport code to run and finish its execution to get simple function evaluation. So what we do is we have a whole suite of what are called derived quantities, where if you have the electron density and temperature, well, you can calculate the pressure, right? If you have the different terms in force balance, you can calculate ER. And you calculate the plasma frequency, collisionality, rho star, beta, all the different things that plasma physicists care about. We also do some interesting things like calculate quantities that are required for self-consistency, data self-consistency, right? We fit the carbon density from charge exchange, but we also have visible Bremsstrahlung arrays. So one of the things that I'm going to do now here on the plotting tab is I'm going to plot measured and expected visible Bremsstrahlung. So because I have the quantities to evaluate the Bremsstrahlung radiation in my profile, I can then integrate along our visible Bremsstrahlung diagnostic and calculate, well, what do I expect to measure if carbon is the dominant impurity and the visible Bremsstrahlung is NE squared to be effective over root TE? here's the calculation. This is the diagnostic view of all these different sightlines. This is the plot of the emissivity as a function of time at this wavelength. And here's the time history, where you can see that in black is the data from the differential and diagnostic, and in red is the line integral of my differential radiation calculated from my profile analysis. So, okay, it looks pretty reasonable. It looks like I'm not missing anything strongly, or my charge exchange diagnostic is not absolutely calibrated with a big error. Things kind of hang together. Okay. So now let me look back at my notes about what I'm supposed to plot. Okay, so one of the things that is commonly an issue is that you have steep gradient regions in the plasma boundary, and you can have misalignment between things like the charge exchange diagnostic and the constant scattering diagnostic. And small misalignments in those profiles create very large errors in things like the plasma is defective, or your inference of the thermal main ion density. So I can plot any set of quantities that I want to plot here, any N12C6, which is the carbon density, and any derived quantity, N2H1, which is the density of the background plasma. And if you look under OMFIT profiles, I'll just look at the tree here. Under the outputs, we have all the raw data, timing information, the slice data. We have things like the fits, which here for electron density is just here. Excuse me, that's the time history of my electron density fit, total velocity. Right? You can just plot anything you want. The total pressure, right? You have access to all these things, plus things that are derived quantities. So here's the radioelectric field. And you can see this ER well as it evolves in time. Of course, ER is positive in the core due to total rotation. Then there's a whole mess of things. So here is like a NUI, the electron functionality. That should be plotted on a log scale, but anyways, there it is. Omega E cross B, or electron pressure. Here's the electron pressure. Or the electron pressure radial derivative, or the inverse scale length. All these things were calculated as soon as you did your profiles. So you have access to plot all different things that you want. So one thing that I'm going to plot here is in overlays, I'm going to plot the plasma ion densities and the electron densities. I think I missaid that. And I can either plot the static time series, which is here. That's not very informative. You can plot it if you want it. And then I'm going to plot what are called 1D interactive profiles. And I just need to set the Y range here. And here you can see my electron density. My carbon density is down here, and my main ion density from quasi neutrality is this dashed one. And like everything else, you can just page through this in time. As you go along, this is kind of a low Elm frequency situation. I can go later in time, the Elm frequency goes up, and the plasma actually becomes more pure because it spits out a lot of carbon. And then I can zoom in on any one time, and you see here's my electron density profile, the main ion density, and the carbon density. So very quickly, you saw that if I wasn't speaking, that I would have been done with this like that. I mean, there's only a couple clicks of a button, given I am a little familiar with the shot, but it is pretty easy to visualize the data. So this is very important for between shot analysis, for comprehensive visualization, but also we have all the tools for powerful post-discharge analysis and processing. So that's for preparing data for transplant. So now, one of the things we do after fitting is I want to plot the separatrix location based on my profile. I mentioned before that very often aligning pedestals in the steep gradient region of an H mode is something of an art form, and a lot of times it needs to be done by hand. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to plot the location of my constant scattering profile at the location where the electron temperature is 80 electron volts, which is nominally where we believe the foot of the pedestal is. If I zoom in really close here, you see that based on my equilibrium reconstruction, that my pedestal TE is inside the plasma, where in reality, I believe that my pedestal TE being 80 or 100 eV should define my separatrix. Here I can zoom in here very, very, very detailed to the plasma boundary, and you see where do my data points really show up. Well, based on a magnetics plus MSD equilibrium, it says that the foot of my pedestal is showing up around normalized rho of 0.98, 0.985. But I want to really align those profiles carefully. Here also is the location of the ER well. So you see here that my ER has a well inside the separatrix is coming up through zero, because that's, of course, where the steep pressure gradient is. Steep pressure gradient should be to the left of the separatrix. And so I have now determined where the separatrix should be, I believe. So now I've analyzed all of my profiles. And so one could go in and spend all your time looking at profile data if you want. But what I'm going to do now is go on to creating the next step, which is creating a refined equilibrium. The equilibrium that I use for mapping the profiles from physical space to flux space was a between-shot EFIT. They're not always perfect. They don't have a very tight threshold of tolerance. They're just really a really great starting point for more refined analysis. So now I'm going to make my new EFIT. And based on my separatrix constraint, I want a boundary constraint based on that core Thompson scattering. Also, since I have rotation in ER, I want to correct the motional Stark effect for the radioelectric field. So here you can preview it. The original data here is blue, and the data corrected for ER is green. Usually makes the pitch angle larger in magnitude, or it says that there's more enclosed current in the plasma than you would otherwise expect from uncorrected MSD. Now, since this is just a refinement of the equilibrium, there's no pressure data. That'll come after running trans. There's also no current data, and I'll let the Q constraint just float. So here we go. I'm going to now run an EFIT for this shot from 2900 to 5300 milliseconds in 100 millisecond steps. So cross your fingers. I did this yesterday and it worked. Okay. This will take a second because it does have to run many equilibria. So this is a good time maybe if anyone has any burning questions that they have. This is a good time to maybe jump in and ask something. Anyone?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
How resilient is this workflow? If I was to break it up into pieces and separate them, maybe split up responsibility for different components, for example. So how standalone are these pieces, or does the whole thing fall apart if you run them as little modules?
No. Very often I will go in and just say, I just want to look at profiles. I don't want to do EFIT. I don't want to run trends. I just want to look at data. So OMFIT profiles here is its own complete standalone module. And same with this EFITtime. I can just run a better MSD-based EFIT if I want. Maybe, I didn't like one of the MSD channels that was turned on. It was near the Thompson boundary. I didn't like it. I turn it off. I make a new equilibrium, and then I put it in a VS Plus. Now, kineticEFITtime by itself, and by definition, doesn't do much besides orchestrate the children modules that are underneath it. Right? It has a limited number of scripts that are like, run the kineticEFIT, set up a run, save an iteration, reload an iteration. Right? See, there's only a couple of different scripts here. All the scripts really are here, like in OMFIT profiles, scripts, DIII-D, fetch, raw Thompson scattering. So this is the script that someone from our Thompson scattering group said, oh yeah, I know how to get that data. Here's the options, here's the list system. Go to MBS Plus and get all the data. And you can see the whole thing here is about 100 lines. 111 rows. And anyone can just, if I wanted to refetch the constant data, I would just double click on that button. And it would just refetch it.
DIII-D and CMOD right now.
So what I'm showing, what I'm demonstrating here is the level of the integration.
It's very
not
easy.
so much
It's just
the
a matter
power
of
any
interest.
one
If people
standalone
are
module.
interested. Yeah.
But as standalone modules, they are quite powerful. Like for trans, for example, trans has a graphical interface here that's just called rplot. And it allows me to plot something like,
Yeah, the same thing for this video. Yeah.
you know, the energy confinement time for some trans runs. Right? You just have to enter the number right here. Right? Say if I want to plot a plasma profile of the electron temperature, I want to plot it. This is a trans run from I don't care who, right? It could be a JET one, an ASIC one. If I know where the MVS plus server is and the tree name, I can get it. And here I'm plotting the electron temperature for, for this shot. And you can see how TE varies in time. Right? Here's some sauces or something. So you can see that this tool is not, is not attached to anything above it. And it doesn't need to know anything about the module above it. It's just being driven by the parent module. Now right here, I look at my EFIT and say I want to look at, so if I want to look at the time, and I want to look at this time slice, I want to plot my equilibrium here. There it is. This is the G equidisc equilibrium. There's my plasma shape. If I want to plot the MSD data, how well does this equilibrium match the MSD data? You can see here, these are the pitch angles in real space, pitch angles in flux space. The solution are the red dots, and the data is the blue with error bar. And then here's my EFIT current profile, and you can see that all these are within the error bar. So I did a good job. I made a nice EFIT. Now those EFITs all live here in outputs under G file. I can go to any one of these G files and just hit enter, and it'll plot it. Or if I click on the next one, if I hit shift enter, it'll overplot that one. Or if I go to the last one here, there's the last one. So of course, stored energy is much higher, there's a much higher pressure, right? P prime is more negative, and it looks like there's a bigger chiffon upshift. So all the data is right there at your fingertips. It's very easy to jump in, grab data, plot it by just hitting enter. We don't need to, those are all part of the class, the Python classes for these different objects. And of course, the convenience is only there because Orso and Tony Smith have spent a lot of time putting these things behind the scenes. Okay, I'm done with my equilibrium, and that new equilibrium had a constraint that the separatrix had to go through where I told it, because I think that I know better. I know where my separatrix is better than the magnetic. So now I'm going to move on to the next step. So I changed to iteration 1. So just to summarize where we are in our workflow, we have, and Orso also wanted to say that the GUIs are nested in that the kineticEFITtime GUI, all it says is that under a tab, put the profile GUI. Okay, so you see here, this is the kineticEFIT GUI. If I go over here to profiles, and if I just hit enter, you see that this is the profile GUI, which is there. They're the same thing. It's just that this entire graphical interface is just now a tab in that graphical interface. So they're totally nested in that sense. You don't have to rewrite any code. Once you define a super module, all the submodules are just how you design them standalone. They just show up as little tabs here, which makes it very, very easy to organize, and it reduces a lot of code duplication. All right, so now what I need to do is I'm going to reanalyze my profile on my new equilibrium. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the entire process. I don't need to change the settings of my fits. I don't need to do anything special. I just want to refit my profiles on my equilibrium that I made in my previous step. So I just click it. And now it's going to run through. It's going to remap the diagnostics onto my new refined equilibrium. It's going to, keep all the same disabled channels or enabled channels that I had selected before. It's going to go through each profile, electron density, temperature, radiant power. It's going to fit all the data, and it's going to update all the derived quantities. So the electron pressure, its gradient, the collisionality in the C gradient region of the pedestal, the effective, all that stuff gets re-updated because I tweak my equilibrium a little bit. And you can see that it can be done just en masse. Right? It steps through all these different sequences. So on to profiles, which is over here. Just going to pause here for a second as it finishes the step. So it's running all these things in the background. A couple of these take a little bit longer than others. We're still learning exactly what quantities are really needed for derived quantities. A number of things need like flux surface average, p squared, and things based on equilibria. And then that algebra can take a little bit of time. Okay, so now it's done. So just to remember, I had selected my shot and all of my time slices. I fetched all my raw data and used an existing between shot EFIT to fit my profile. Then, based on knowledge gained in the profile fitting step, I made a new EFIT. So then, because the EFIT changed and the mapping changed, you need to refit your profile. And so I just blew through that whole process, but it normally can be very tedious. Just have to click of a button. And so now when I go over here to plot, actually I'll just plot it here. If I go to Thompson scattering, and I plot the Thompson scattering splice data, where before my separatrix electron temperature bounced all over the place, right? It moved all left and right, left and right, left and right. Now here the separatrix always goes to the same temperature point. So now I've aligned my Thompson scattering diagnostic with where I believe the separatrix is. So now everything looks really nice in the pedestal region. So I'm done with the profile. I'm satisfied. Now normally you should spend about a day looking through every single time slice and make sure none of them are crazy. Because the diagnostics are only at some level automatic profile analysis, but generally not custom.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to move on to run.
You can do this just by clicking a button.
Yes, sir.
So
No.
one of
Here,
the
you just
points
click a
of
button and you
this
get
presentation
all
is
of that done.
to show how we run trans.
Like what is
And
the
you can see that
manual?
what I did is I prepared all the inputs to trans just naturally. Trans means equilibrium, means time history, it means profile. So I'm going to go over here and say, since all the data that I need is over here in output, either under fit quantities, derived quantities, or in my equilibrium here, in my output is my G file. Trans knows about these two modules, and I say initialize trans. So it's going to search for all the existing trans run IDs, and it's just going to find the next one. It's going to run a script that sets up NuBeam. It's going to check if there's electron-cyclotron heating in the shot. If there is, it'll set that up. It turns all the profiles into a trans view file. It takes all the equilibria and puts them in a local scratch directory and runs a scruncher to turn the equilibrium into U files and does the square moment decomposition. And it gets a default name list that we have produced for DIII-D, and it fills that name list with all the available data and changes the names and all the U files to be consistent with what we've created. And it really does all the work for you to prepare a transfer. And so now it's running the scruncher, and there's a bunch of equilibria that can scrunch. I think most people are familiar with, most trans users are familiar with the process.
It will solve the current diffusion. It will, yeah.
right? It's running
You need
all the
if you
Fortran
want to
codes.
if you want to get
We have some of the
the booster
transfer
current,
here.
you need
And then it prints off a bunch of things.
so this
Trans server, all this stuff. And so now here the input name list option, U files and U file options.
yeah, you'll see, because what you want to do is a kinetic equilibrium reconstruction. So yeah.
So you need to specify a comment. So you need to say like testing trans for JET demo, right? We start the trans run before our first analysis time. So our first analysis time is 2.9 seconds. But of course, the beam injection is causal. The fast ion distribution function at 2.9 seconds depends on the beam power that was injected a couple hundred milliseconds before, 1 or 2 slowing down time. So the trans run will start at 2.7 seconds, and we'll end it just beyond our last time slide, 20 milliseconds. We're going to use 100 radial zones, and we'll use 8 new beam cores. And so new beam is load balanced at 4,000 particles per CPU, so this will be 32,000 new beam particles. We're going to use current evolution because we're using this in a kineticEFIT, but of course you can turn it off. There's Saucer. We're going to switch from interpretive analysis to current diffusion at 2.8 seconds. Before 2.8 seconds, we're going to use IP from data and match total plasma current, so the current profile will come from EFIT. But after the switch time, we're going to use the predictive or resistive current evolution to match total plasma current. There's a couple of switches here to eliminate current holes or really bad current holes. It can happen with near-active ETH. And it's going to relax the current profile every 100 milliseconds in sawtooth. There's options for fast ion diffusion. One can say I want to use the anomalous diffusion. And you can optionally use the PID controller or specify some value, but I'm just going to turn it off. There's the neutral beams. You can edit the neutral beam settings. There are diagnostics, such as simulating the MSD pitch angle. There's things like what's called AC file output, where here I can output a fast ion distribution function or the beam neutral density if I want. Let me just turn that off. And now here's something that's new that a lot of people might not be totally familiar with, which is called Predictive Trans Solver. So trans has the ability to replace a fluid variable, like the electron temperature, with TE from a transport model, like TGLF or GLF23 or the multi-mode transport model. And you can go over here and say, I'm going to use the predictive trans solver. And it gives you all the different options. You want to change from interpretive to predictive at 3.2 seconds. I want to use GLF23, where here, this is the core model. You can change the number of radial zones with the specified boundary region. And you select what you want to put in from the current temperature, That's a new feature. It is normally a very labor-intensive thing for someone to set up. I'm going to disable it for now. But here you can use, you can look at the U files that you have prepared. So maybe I come in here and I look at the electron density. I'm going to plot it. There it is. There's my electron density in my U file. I can smooth it if I want, or I can do various other manipulations. And there's also some other U file options, like where you want to use the recycling, or if you want to change the beam smoother. Right? Now, for this demo, I'm not going to actually run trans, because it'll take like an hour. For it to run, I'm going to use an existing trans run. And I'm going to use trans run A02, which is an existing trans run that I ran the other day, over the same time range for the same shot. And so this trans run is completed. And you can see that once the trans run is done, it switches from prepare trans run to plot the data. So that means that way you can't rerun an existing run as the run already exists. The first thing you normally want to do is comparative experiments. And so here I'm plotting the input neutrons and the neutron rate that comes out of trans. So these are all the different contributions to the neutrons. The total neutrons that comes outside of trans is purple, and the measured neutrons are blue. Right? So you can see that they agree pretty well. They're not systematically off that much. This is the total stored energy. So in blue and green are from the equilibrium. In red is the stored energy from the transpond. This is the thermal contribution to stored energy in the light blue, and the fast ion contribution in purple. So you can see that it's mostly a thermal azimuth plasma. Okay, so we've done the transpond. The next thing that we need to do is use that transpond in our equilibrium. So I'm going to disable trans, and I'm going to enable the equilibrium. Let me just look at my notes and make sure that I'm somewhat on the script there. Oh wait, I was going to show one other thing. Okay, I normally will turn on the MSD pitch angle simulator inside of trans. You commonly do to see if the resistive current diffusion is consistent with the observed two-profile evolution. So I can grab some MSD channel here, and I can plot the pitch angle simulator and overplot the raw data. So here in black is the pitch angle from MSD, and in the dashed red is the pitch angle without ER, and then in the red, here is the pitch angle including the effect of the radial electric field. You can also plot the profile for the MSD channels based on systems, radial systems, tangential systems. Now you can see one of them has a really big error bar at some time. You can zoom in on any one of these and plot the data and the simulation. See the data's got some healthy error bars, so you can say whether or not the current profile evolved resistively. Because our hybrids, normally it doesn't. There's this magic called flux pumping that people like to investigate. Here you can just plot all the data, and there's mountains and mountains of data. Okay, so now I'm going to use that transpond in equilibrium. So I'm going to change now, I'm in iteration 1. I've done my profiles, I've run trans. Now I'm going to use that transpond in the EFIT, which for this demo is like, quote unquote, the product. You want an equilibrium that you can put into Derived analysis or elite or something else. So now we're going to run a new EFIT. So I'm going to turn off the boundary constraint because I want a really natural equilibrium. And there's some new options here, which is that there's a pressure. The pressure tab now is available. And here you can preview the pressure constraint. And here it is. This is how the pressure has evolved in time. You can see in these colors up here are the total pressure. The dashed lines here are the fast ion pressure. You see the fast pressure becomes a significant fraction of the total pressure later in time when the beam power is high. I can also preview my current constraint. This is how the edge current density evolves in time. So this is the total current evolution, but then this is the edge current density that I'm going to use to constrain the EFIT. And then I also want to look at my basis functions. So my basis functions are the amount of freedom I have in my equilibrium reconstruction. And so I need to move these around here a little bit. So in blue is P prime from the data. The red points are the not locations for fitting the basis functions. And red is the connection of the spline. So I can use my arrow keys. Unfortunately, the plotting range for this isn't the best. I can use my arrow keys to move around in time to see how P prime and SF prime evolve throughout the shot. And you see the 7 knots, which is the default, does a good job of representing the pressure and current source function for retrofiles. So I've previewed that. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to run my EFIT. I think that I've gone through everything here. So now I'm going to run a new equilibrium that has the kinetic constraint. It has P prime constrained from my profile analysis previously. It has FF prime constrained from the bootstrap current model and Sauter and trans. It has MSD that's been corrected for ER based on my profile analysis. And that's pretty much it. So now I'm going to run the equilibrium. And this will take a second. So now is another good time for, if people have questions. If so, if not, let me know. Yeah? No questions? Okay. I see someone on the chat. Let me look. Okay. Oh, Orso wants me to show maybe some easy to understand scripts. Do you have any suggestions, Orso?
Let's see.
How about the GUI script? Yeah.
The JET,
Or
the JET demo, not that.
So this will just take 1 second. Let me see if I can go here. Let me go to graphical interfaces. And this is the on-fit profile GUI. That's a good one, I don't know. So you can see here that you make a GUI. Maybe this isn't the way to understand. Not a very good one. Let me try to find one. I think trans is pretty simple.
Yeah, we're under kineticEFITtime, run kineticEFIT. I think that's a really high level, probably easy to understand.
Okay.
Under scripts, run kineticEFITtime.
Okay.
So yeah, this is like the script that gets run. So all of what Brian has shown can be basically run automatically just by pushing a button. So now he was doing everything one step at a time, but basically these are the steps that, you know, if you said, you know, run the whole thing would have it. So it's kind of a summary if you want, high level.
Right. So this just, it gets the basic settings for the tool, which is the iterations, the shots, and the times. If you want to run all the profile analysis, all it does is say .run on the script, which is equivalent to typing enter on it in the graphical on the GUI over here on the left. And then this is what's required to set up and execute the transform. Right, so if you want to set it up, it says run history U files, crunch2 profiles, and transp setup. So these are all small standalone scripts that each do their own little task. So it really forces you to break up the workflow into all the little subtasks. So each one can be easily executed, debugged, or rerun without needing to get into the guts of a large block of code. So everything is very, very modular. And none of them can cause errors that cause it to crash. So they all have like clean entry and exit. You can rerun any little script easily. So you can see the entire graphical interface for running kineticEFITtime is this entire block of code, which is 50 lines, which for people that program is 0, effectively 0. Okay, so now my equilibrium is done. So let me go over to the EFIT. And let's see, what do I want to plot? I have my notes here. So I'll go under plotting, and I'll select, just some time in the shot randomly. And I want to compare my MSD-based EFIT, which is iteration 0, to my new kinetically constrained EFIT, iteration 1. So I'm going to plot the constraints and the gradients. And I'm going to overplot those 2 phases. Hold on. Here. And you can see on the top left here in blue is P prime from EFIT-02. And the dashed line is my constraint. And the green curve is my solution. Here it is for FF prime. We can see that the source functions have changed significantly. You can see here's the pressure. From EFIT-02 was the blue thing. You see there wasn't much of a pressure pedestal. And then my solution EFIT, which has this pressure pedestal here, which is going through this green curve. And then here's the bootstrap curve. So you can see I've made a new EFIT that has those constraints. And I think I can plot, yeah. Oh, it's going to plot all of them, I think. So you're just going to plot all my G, oh, I selected the wrong thing. I selected all, I wanted to select one. You can hear that it's plotting all of my new equilibria. And so I can quickly see where something maybe went a little bit haywire for one of them. You know, it has a constraint that's really big, it's a separatrix, so maybe it should be closer to 0 for Q prime. Here's my Q profile. You know, this is a relatively low P95, and it's a sawtooth shot, so there's something really interesting here. It's kind of normal Q profile. Here's my pressure constraint. You can see I just zoom in and look at my results. Okay. So now I'm like, quote unquote, done. So now I could spend, you know, a week making each one of these equilibria perfect if I really need them. Or if I want to move on to do something and I just needed a better EFIT-02 with a better pressure constraint and a ER-corrected MSC for some transport analysis, then I would be done with that stuff. So then the next thing I'm going to show is what would you do next? All right. So in kineticEFITtime, I also have trans as a submodule and TRXPL. So let's say I want to now check whether my profiles are consistent with the TGLF transport model. Or if I want to run turbulence stability analysis. So I'm going to use this little script here, and I'm going to extract the plasma state from trans at some time. Right? D3D is this shot, it's this time, it's this transfer ID, and I'm going to average the profiles over an energy confinement time, just to get the power balance. So here I'm going to extract the plasma state. Done. And so now, under TRXPL output, there's a state file.
Yeah.
And the state file has everything you need to run a code like gyro or gene or TGLF. You can see this is the normal state file that one would normally extract from the command line. And now I'm going to totally change gears, and I'm going to say I want to do something different. I want to do a TGLF scan to look at how stiff TGLF thinks my ion temperature profile is in this. So I go over here to TGLF scan. It's its own standalone GUI. It's got its own scripts and submodules. I'm going to say, well, I want to know what TGLF thinks about ion energy flux. I'll say I'm going to use a state file from the tree. And I'm going to run a tool to convert my trans run into a gyro input state file. And I say I want to investigate the ion thermal stiffness at rho of 0.5. I set up TGLF. And it's going to produce TGLF inputs at all my different radii. And say I want to look at, say, the thermal ion temperature scale length. I just want to do an A over LTI scan. So run TGLF. I'm going to run this in parallel. So normally, what one has to do is, if you have a trans run, you need to go to the command line, you need to extract a plasma state, you need to set up your paths to have the GA code set of tools, which are TGLF and NEO and data, and then you need to have designed a tool to execute these scans and visualize it. But all of this just comes straight out of OMFIT modules. So here now I'm going to plot a scan. So here I run TGLF for this case. My experimental heat flux, experimental energy flux, and the ions and the electrons are these two lines, or these two stars. And I did a scan of A over LTI. And so for 0 ion temperature scale length, up to A over LTI of like 3.6. And you see there's little ion energy flux early. Let me zoom in here. Little ion energy flux. And all of a sudden you hit the critical gradient and the ion energy flux goes shooting off like a rock. And for this example, you will see that my ion temperature scale length is very close to the one from TGLF. So that's very encouraging, right? So TGLF will be a good transport model for looking at this shot at this radius and this time. And so the other way that I can do this is I can run tgyro, which is an integrated modeling tool where I would import tgyro. This is like Trinity, if people are familiar with the Trinity profile prediction tool. tgyro is very similar. I'm going to set up based on a state file from here. We're going to run profiles gen. And I'll just reorder the ions like this. I'll just run it for 4 radial zones. 0.7. I'll just do something very quick and dirty. Skip the density. I just want to predict the temperatures. Say with no heat recipe shear. And so I want to run tgyro. So this will just take a second. It'll print off in the screen here as the iterations continue. This is a Newton solver, which is something that we use for looking at whether or not TGLF or gyro is capturing the thermal gradients and transport for a given plasma condition. So I'll just let it iterate here for a couple of seconds. I just gave it 4 iterations. So this is running an executable on disk. So of course you have to have the TGLF and these tools built for them to work. But this executes remotely, so I can be at home on my laptop, and it will log in to the General Atomics computers and run this, and then pull all the data back via SCP and rsync. Okay, there's done. I don't give it 4 iterations. I mean, it's moving towards convergence. But here I can plot the tgyro of the energy fluxes. And so, it started off poorly matching the fluxes here and here. After 4 iterations, it's adjusted the profiles to bring them into power balance. It's not done, but it's working. And you can plot how the profiles are evolving. And you see that what it's doing here, it's not evolving that much. It tends to be kind of straightening out TE, and it's starting to reduce TI. So it's going to end up dropping the ion temperature a little bit. But this is really, predicting profiles based on TGLF. Mm-hmm. And so, in terms of the entire scope of work that we've done, this demo has been going on for just over an hour. We've selected a D3D shot. We've looked at the time history. We've chosen an equilibrium to do our profile analysis. We've analyzed our profiles. We've made a better refit and reanalyzed the profiles. Then we ran trans and made kinetic EFITs based on that transfer, and was able to check at all stages the level of diagnostic and data consistency. And then since the transplant is completed, we immediately handed off to a predictive modeling workflow, where now I'm going to use the power flows that were in my transplant and my profiles as an initial guess, and say, What if I was going to use TGLF to predict the shot, right? So you can see everything was done in this one little project. And over here I can make my notes saying ran transport jet demo starting T-gyro simulations without E cross T shear. And then I can go up here and just save it, save the project. So now when you save this project, what's really beautiful about this is that it saves not only the data and the results, but it saves all of the scripts that were used to create the data. So that way, if you open OMFIT at a later time and you restore this project, even if the public, the public version of OMFIT has changed, your project will be identical to the way that it was when you first saved it. So if you used a certain script to adjust the MSC data for correcting for ER, then that script will be identical to the way it was when you ran it. So that way, if you repeat any analysis, you get the exact same answer. It's not dependent on underlying changes of the framework and how OMFIT has evolved in time. But if it does evolve, and you want to get a new feature, like we add a new thing to this derived quantity. Like let's say someone says we need to calculate function, from some paper, right? And they use a specific definition of collisionality. We need to add that. Well, I can go up here and say I want to reload my OMFIT modules, and I'll select OMFIT profiles and I'll reload them. And if a script was updated, I could add that script and go back and reevaluate my profiles with a new function being evaluated. So you can easily add new things to it. And everything is being revision controlled on GitHub. So at this point, I would just like to stress how wonderful this has been for eliminating code duplication by multiple users. And a lot of people have their own way of viewing profiles, their own way of calculating some derived quantity, right? Here, we work with all the different scientists, like myself, Morrison, Sterling, and people that are doing their own specific thing, and we get their knowledge and their kind of the rule of thumb or the conventional wisdom about what something should look like, and we make the intuitive graphics and produce the desired outputs that people need in order to see whether or not your new star scan is going well in the control room. And you want to plot new stars in two different shots that are supposed to match new stars. And you want to be able to quickly do that. And you want everyone to also see the same information. Such that when I'm looking at profiles in EFIT, and the guy down the hall is also looking at profiles in EFIT, we're looking at it with the same set of tools that everyone has decided upon as being probably the best way to look at this data. And so it's been really revolutionary for that reason. And so, there's a big amount of congratulations to go to Orso and Sterling for organizing this. And we see this really as the way of the future for our integrated data analysis. A lot of the modules are written by the scientific staff. And so it's really been a game changer for us. So I'd like to open this up for questions. And maybe people have comments or things that the way that they do something, or they think we're doing it, in a really interesting and novel way, or they do it differently and they want us to know about it. Because I don't know exactly how this happens on another token. I know to some extent how it happens on NCI. So does anyone have any comments, questions, applause? Applause.
So we're definitely seeing all of the same things. I mean, there's tools that were developed. There wasn't. I think a similar tool has been developed at MAST called MCQ, which is basically Rob Akers took a heck of a lot of different IDL scripts for these subsystems, and he sort of tied it all together into a graphic interface. And ironically, it's pretty much exactly the same functionality that you've demonstrated today, which is this kind of completely free kinetic equilibrium reconstruction. So yeah, so the difficulty in getting it, in terms terms of duplication of effort and things like that, that's kind of out of scope of what we're looking at the moment. We're mostly interested in the little sub-module that's devoted to trans. So I guess we'll have to look very closely. We'll have to look closely at what it's doing and see it's. I mean, it'd be great. I mean, there's a whole lot of people who are looking at this kind of thing, but in completely different contexts to trans. So yeah, we have to point them towards this as well.
We also find that having some amount of this, what I would call ownership of the data prep and visualization, really helps streamline the trans preparation and analysis, and then post-run visualization. Like people want to compare neutron rates and stored energy and fast particle stuff. Having everyone use the same tool for not only preparing, executing, and visualizing trends, then going on to the next steps, which is running a code like the DIII-D diagnostic simulator, or using the transp file for running gyro or some other tool. Having it all maintained in one tool, in one interface, which is, has been really helpful for us to share projects. You know, for example, someone on the hall might say, well, I'm trying to do T-gyro for this case. And say, well, where's your project? And I can open their project and very easily see, where they're working on haywire, or what they're doing right or wrong, or how a setting could have been changed. Without somebody needed to come and knock on your door or print out a bunch of stuff and have to describe it to you. It's been a great thing for collaboration in that sense.
So one of the things we were mentioning earlier was in terms of provenance, does it store in some obvious way what manipulations you've done to data when you're preparing these runs, or is it just you store the project and that's kind of
the project has all the settings that were used for every single step. So if you're using a causal panning window and you're interpolating this data with a smoothing with 20 milliseconds, all of that is stored in the big zip file. So this entire thing you can see down here at the bottom is created this big zip file.
Okay.
If you unzip that file, it is a directory structure exactly like what you see here. So for OM fit profile settings, physics, fit, electron density, I use radial basis functions. And for radial basis functions, here's the smoothing I use, the time correlation, the bias, and it was a log transform to remove negatives.
And Brian, I think you can show that the subsequent iterations of the kineticEFITtime workflow, they are saved under kineticEFITtime, I think outputs, and there are all of the different iterations. So we can go back at any step in the kineticEFITtime workflow.
Right. So here's my here for iteration 0, I only had a K file to run EFIT, and that's stored here under iteration 0 EFITtime outputs. Here are inputs. But under outputs, I have my G file, which is here, which I showed before. So everything is then stored in a directory structure exactly like this tree structure.
Okay, so in terms of if we were going to use this to run transgive, presumably the primary things we need to replace are these fetch functions we've written the full DIII-D data. To replace that with some script that interfaces with R.
Well, if I look at the trans module, there's scripts. If I have, say, history U files, right? It can get the history data from an MDS plus tree. You can get it from the OMFIT tree. It checks if there's other modules that are loaded that have the information that we need. And so here, for example, in this case, let me pull this up. I have the option of getting tau E if I want to change the particle consensus time. Right? If the bias DIII-D and you have some setting for the recycling source and execute this, and set the name list. Right? It's just a couple of lines, each one of these. Right? Like diamagnetic beta, did this from the U file, and from Scrunch 2.
All right. So if we had a lot of the kind of background work for the experiments where we have profiles that we trust. So we've had a kind of all this manipulation and looking for bad data points and that sort of thing already taken care of.
Sure.
If we had a bunch of, if we could write if we had the profiles written, or as signals even, could you give an estimate of how long it would take to get that data into the system, to get that, to write what's required to get that into the system?
One day.
So that we add it to the machines, for example.
Orsa can definitely field this question because Orsa went PPCL and spoke with people at NSTX, and under ONFIT profiles, scripts, NSTX, fetch, he just had to sit down and write these couple of scripts, and it just took him a few days.
Okay. Right.
So actually, the thing that takes the most is to find a diagnostician who can tell you where the data is, and whether it's ready to be fetched. So what you would need is probably to write those scripts for JET, and then the on-fit profiles module is very generic. So after the fetching is done, all of the coordinate system and so on are handled internally. And then you would want also to set up the EFIT module. So we need to know where the EFIT executable is, but it's very easy. And then for trans, I don't know. Probably the thing. I don't know what you guys use for example, for setting the NBI or the ECH, name list, but I guess you have some ideal scripts that do that. So we can just call those out of the box and be ready to go.
Jim.
Well, I think the biggest
was very fan of.
There's a whole where we delegate responsibility for different parts of data validation. So there's a whole meeting data validation where the people take responsibility for different profiles. So a lot of the time, people will not be sort of fitting their own. I mean, sometimes they'll do it, but a lot of the time, people won't be fitting their own profiles, in this profile step. But presumably, you could, get the data. If you had the signals ready to go, you could kind of circle.
So we can take the signals. That's trivial, and we can take the U files directly. But honestly, I think that you'll find that the possibility of keeping your own profiles liberating.
Going to watch the match? Is there a match?
Well, that's my
There's
next.
a
My next question is: how many people have you liberated? So when you've got
it's 20.
presumably, you have
Russia,
long-term trans users or long-term EFIT users who have their own workflows. And what's adoption like for experienced users?
So experienced users are the worst. I will. It's very hard to ask Len Lau to run EFIT, through OnFit. But for example, he will run Elite through it, and people who are experts, like Stan K, actually did this exercise that we did to run, Transp for NSTX, because they don't have a good way to actually do profile fitting. So even if he's the maximum expert of Transp, he's running actually he's learning how to run Transp this way. In many ways, telling a code to run is not the hard part. It's really preparing the simulation. The hard part.
Yeah, so the trans module has multiple, what I would call entry points. You can enter the trans module from using the existing user profile fits that live on the disk somewhere. You don't have to enter it through ONFit profile.
Right.
So you can enter into any module. We just have to make sure that the access point is written, and then once it's written, then it's very easy to then just continue on using the tools we have for preparing, monitoring, running trends, and visualizing the data.
I think what's very attractive to us is the fact that this is modular and atomic, where we can start baby steps. We can work on getting just the data and the trap stuff working, and the elaboration we can add pieces as we go. That's probably the most attractive thing. I think that's probably the approach we'll take at first, is where we'll just take a look very closely at how you're generating your, how you're initiating your transp run and writing your U files and things like that. And I think this, you're showing stuff like, Elite and TGIRE and stuff. This is a much bigger community than just transp. This is, this is, more and more people need to be looped in on this if it's going to be adopted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, I have a question for Jet. How accessible is your data from the outside?
We have the PPF system here, which is the JET specific database, but we also have MDS Plus bindings to that. And I haven't experimented with it, but I presume that we could do all of this in reading MDS Plus to stop having, so that you could run it offsite. But I don't know about the firewall, which labs and I don't know how the security is done for that. But in principle, yeah, we have MDS Plus.
It's for sensitive.
I'm
sure you can find the Apple Store. Gothenburg. No?
So probably one way to
Oh my God. What do you do? Press there if you want to click, press there if you want to right click. Left click, and then that's in the middle of stuff.
Also help out, we will have to install OnSuite there. It's not hard, but
If you want
I'll
to,
make sure to provide a public installation.
maybe
there.
close, no?
There are many already publicly available
Connect.
OnSuite installations, but I think we should
And
have
I think
one
these are
local,
probably not set to fire just once, that's why I didn't
and then we can
Yeah,
then experiment
you should
to
fire
gather
only
the
one.
data and then
That was okay, but
I'm
I
sure
think, but the other ones are probably not.
for an expert, it would take just a day or two to basically
But
get
it's okay. If this one only fires one, then this one will only be reached once. Publicly reached, that's one.
At least I can speak for myself. I guess also Brian, we're available for helping you guys out.
Yeah, man.
Sure, we would also want to know what you guys use for your default trans name list. So this is just an example of our default trans name list that gets loaded in. And you would want to decide whether or not.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. We're doing a lot of housekeeping at the moment. We're redefining what the default name list is right now.
We have some example templates and things that we can go from. And stuff, so
there's a few jobs to do, like I don't know if you use ending list, for example, for getting your beam settings and stuff.
NSTX uses that. D3D, we broke that a little while ago when we tilted one of our off-axis beams, and it needed a different method of data preparation.
Yeah.
So we have an IDL.
Yeah, we use an ND list for NSTX, so that's already done.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a kind of example. A lot of these sort of things, we'll be making decisions about whether we're keeping things like ND list or whether we're going to rewrite it. So there's a big upheaval there, I would say. I guess
But that's very
want
strange.
to
Because this needs a CPU.
Right.
Yeah, and also
The problem is,
just realize that
you
the driving principle here is to reuse as much as possible
First?
of what's been done before, right? So
yeah, because you have
if
to wait for this
everything is
one.
working, that's why I was able to have this thing going for NSTX so quickly because we
Now I
reuse
know.
as much as possible.
You have to.
What's there. So if you guys have a way to
It's just
prepare profiles,
a matter of.
sure, we can definitely go for that.
Right. Well, I mean, we'll have to sit down and look at what we've seen today and think about what I mean. But thank you very much for your offer for helping us with getting OMFit up and running.
Just a name?
I think what the detail, we'll have to make the decisions about what belongs in that trans module. I think we just need to look at it now with our own eyes and understand what's going on before we try implementing it. I think that's probably the next step. Yeah, but how is this? How open is this at the moment? Like when NSTX or DIII-D or whoever put their custom stuff into OpenFit, does that lie somewhere on a public GitHub? Is that how everybody's going with this?
I think it's a private GitHub, but
Right, okay.
Marcel can talk more about.
Yeah, I mean, it is private, in the sense that we want to know who has access to the code, but, we basically have granted, read and write actually permission to the code to anyone. What you should probably do, Brian will probably send out a link to the documentation, and, you can basically follow the links and make your request for the installation, and we'll give you access. We've been using GitHub and we've been extremely happy with that. We discuss physics issue there, code issue. We use a version,
Now I know why I moved to Max. The trackpad is
active community.
I can tell you, if we're getting something working with trans, I think the EFIT people will be very, very interested. I can think of already I have a lot of people who are interested in kinetic EFIT. But I think the next step is probably we should just look exactly what's required for the fetch portion and see if we can produce something for JET that looks like we'll take one of the other ones as a template, and then we'll try and to
zero order, you can even start from existing transparent. So if you have a directory with all the script files, you don't put a GUI, there is an option, just start from existing one.
And then there is
in a way you can from what you already have.
But from our point of view, the most important thing is orchestration and running trans rather than sort of
maybe not too complicated.
well,
Something continuous time
We can run the transparency
It's very simple.
well. Let me set up the
and this is it.
set up
I was thinking delay line, maybe. I think it's a delay line. What it was
okay, well, I think we've exhausted our welcome from Brian after a couple hours now. So I think we'll call that a day. And thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very good.
We'll definitely follow up on. I think we'll probably go ahead with this sort of approach for trans now, but we have to look at the details now. So we'll be in touch about the details.
Right, sounds great. I'll send a follow-up email.
Thank you.
All right, fantastic. And thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Good. Michael is very active.
That's if you pay for
I'm
it.
sure that he will try something. Michael Fitchell, he's the responsible officer for transport.
Oh, is he?
So, number 46.
So the developer must be in the